Today I want to talk about everything you need to know to grow my absolute favorite plant in the world, Philodendron verrucosum. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Just over 5 years ago I bought a teeny tiny Philodendron verrucosum, and over the last 5 years we definitely had lots of ups and downs, but ever since I started growing this it has been my absolute favorite plant, and it being on the rather tricky scale of growing houseplants hasn't changed that. So today I want to share with you everything I know about this plant. We're starting off with the origin to understand the plant a little bit better and understand what natural environment it enjoys. We're then going to talk about the features of this plant, followed by the preferred growing conditions, and then I'm going to give you my tips and tricks about this plant so that hopefully you can replicate my success. Philodendron verrucosum is in the Araceae family, aka it is an aroid, which is pretty much 95% of all of my plants. It is a philodendron, and it is also known as Philodendron discolor or Philodendron pilatonesi. I'll put it on screen down below. I personally have never heard that plant being referred to as one of those, but in my research that's what I came across, so I thought might as well include it. It is native to Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador and Peru. And if we're looking at the map, we can see that it is quite a wide distribution of this species. So it's not necessarily surprising to think that verrucosum from one side of that map looks different to verrucosum from the opposite side of the map, and hence we end up with lots and lots of different forms of Philodendron verrucosum, making it a really collectible plant. Now I'm in Australia and we can't really import plants, well technically you can, but it's a lengthy, costly process. At the end of the day it's not necessarily worth it for your end consumer like me. So basically we have a very limited gene pool available in Australia, and to my knowledge this is the only form we have in the country. It is just referred to as Philodendron verrucosum over here, but I went online and I had a bit of a look to kind of understand what this form might be described as in different countries, and I think the best I could find was actually just regular form. I think this is just regular form, but I've never seen any of the other forms in person. It's hard to kind of just judge it by a photo and so on. So I think for today we're just going to refer to this as regular form verrucosum. But there's other forms available. For example, verrucosum Amazon Sunset is on my wish list, has always been my wish list, but I don't think it's in the country. So there are some really nice forms available. I think in Europe they have one called Insensei, which tends to be much smaller and bushier and darker compared to this one over here. So there are definitely differences, and with differences in forms, because of differences in origin, also come differences in natural conditions. So keep that in mind, but today I'm just referring to the regular form, the one that is right next to me, the one that I've been growing for 5 years, the one that I have gathered plenty of experience with. Philodendron species have been collected from elevations ranging from 50 all the way to 2,000 meters above sea level, which is 165 to 6,550 feet. So quite a high range, right? And the higher in elevation we go, the cooler it gets. Now most of them are found in pre-mountainous rainforest regions above 500 meters. So no Mount Everest over here, but about 500 meters above sea level definitely has an impact on the temperature, and in general just is a little bit cooler. Now of course when I say cooler temperatures, I'm not referring to cold temperatures. It's still a tropical warm rainforest environment, but from what I've noticed and what I've seen online is verrucosum definitely prefers temperature ranges around 20 degrees Celsius, whereas a lot of other tropical philodendron, like Melanochrysum for example, definitely likes it a little bit higher and thrives more in like 24, 25, 26 degrees Celsius. So not a ginormous difference, and far from being a cold climate plant, just slightly cooler. But as always with a tropical rainforest, humidity is through the roof and there is consistent rainfall. Again, if we're taking it back to the large distribution, of course there's differences over here, right? Like we can't take a ginormous section of the world map and classify it all into one climate, but I'm supposed to be talking about the average over here, right? Alrighty, now that we know where it comes from, let's talk about the obvious kind of, right? Philodendron verrucosum is a hemiepiphyte. I've actually, first time I encountered this word, to be honest, upon my research. Well, I know what an epiphyte is. Epiphyte is a plant that grows in the tree, in the canopy, right? So they don't necessarily start off on the ground, but rather they start off in the tree themselves, like bromeliads, for example. From what I've read is that hemiepiphytes is a classification of plants that can be best described as almost like an epiphyte, growing attached to a host tree without drawing nourishment from the host. Hemiepiphytes, I think it might be pronounced hemaepiphyte. I'll pronounce it the way that I want. May begin life as a seed dropped on the branch of a tree by a bird in its droppings, which finally sends roots down to the soil or rooted in soil and then climbs any nearby tree. I always thought it was referred to as semi-epiphytic. Maybe I just got the first letter confused. I don't know. Anyway, basically bottom line is it likes to climb up trees. It might start on the forest floor and then climb up the tree, or it might start on the tree and then climb up the tree. But at the end of the day, it wants to climb the tree. That's most important for us to know. The leaf shape is extremely beautiful. It is the perfect heart-shaped leaf with really nice lobes. The texture is volutinous. Basically, it has lots and lots of teeny tiny hairs on the surface of this leaf blade, which makes it appear as velvet. And I think that is what makes it such a stunning plant and such a collector's item, right? I mean, that is definitely the part of the plant that I like the most, or that's a feature that I really like in all sorts of plants, really. Like if it's velvet, I'm in. But upon my research, I actually found something really cool that I haven't encountered before. It said that in the wild, the plant's thick velvet leaves can deter any pests as they find it harder to penetrate. The plant also produces a natural chemical defense that can repel certain insects. Well, mine definitely needs to learn how to repel spider mites, but we're going to talk about that later. But I thought that was a really cool thing. I always say that clean, healthy leaves have an easier time fighting off pests. They are actually actively fighting off pests in nature, right? In nature, nobody goes around and sprays or wipes the leaves, but of course plants have also, through evolution, developed natural defense mechanisms. However, that natural defense mechanism is probably not necessarily going to, help us out when growing indoors in the first place. But yeah, we're going to talk about pests. Don't you worry. Now, it has slightly wavy edges. As you can see, it's not super flat. It's actually such a cute little dainty feature. Now, from the front, the veining is, I wouldn't describe it as white. I would kind of describe it as lime green almost. However, the bits in between the veins, the actual leaf, is looking so beautiful in dark green. They come out a little bit more lime green first, and then over time they fade to this really nice dark green. And that dark green is enhanced by the beautiful red backs. Let me put it this way maybe. Let me just turn the plant. The backside, aka the abaxial of the leaf, is so beautiful and red, and that is definitely a feature that I always really appreciate in plants. Unfortunately, the red fades over time. Not fades with maturity, but you can see these leaves that are a little bit older, like this one here, or this one is the oldest one I've got on this plant for now, no longer has the red. The red is most dominant at the beginning when the leaves first emerge, and then it slowly fades, unfortunately. However, I have also noticed that when you sun stress the plant a little bit, the red actually gets more intense. However, sun stressing the plant is not a good option. Actually, the plant doesn't like all too much light, but we're talking about that in a second as well. Now, there are a lot of different hypotheses as to why plants develop these sort of red backsides, and I read into it a little bit, and there isn't actually really conclusive evidence from what I found. Just a few hypotheses, and the currently most well-supported explanation for abaxial leaf reddening is that the red pigment functions to reduce the effects of excess light. This plant doesn't like excess light, so apparently it's a great way to reflect the excess light, which then would also kind of explain why it's more red when sun stressed. Now, I don't know if that is the reason. I don't think anybody actually knows if that's the reason why plants develop red backs. Also, there could be different reasons for different plants and so on, right? So at the end of the day, I don't know exactly why it is, but I'm just appreciating it for its beauty. I think that's good enough for today. And lastly, it has really nice petioles. It has kind of like hairy petioles, has little bristles on it. I have learned today that officially the term is called pubescence, but that to me honestly sounds way worse than just hairy petioles. So I think I'm going to stick to hairy petioles. The same happens with the Caterpillar, by the way, as well as the inflows. They all have the little pubescence. I think it makes it a really nice feature, and these petioles are lengthy. You saw them, right? So the plant definitely is a bit of a space commitment, but at least the petioles are nice and hairy, so they are like interesting to look at, right? And so they're kind of a feature in themselves, which I really enjoy. And then it's kind of cute how the little hair comes through the sinus over here as well. I don't know, I find it super cute. Alrighty, now that gives us a really solid foundation and understanding of this plant to now talk about the growing conditions and then the care approach with this plant. Conditions will always set the potential. The closer we can get those conditions to the native conditions this plant would be exposed to, the better of a time we'll have growing this plant. So, this plant does not want direct sun. It is an understory plant, and yes, it climbs up the tree and gets access to slightly more light as it climbs the tree. It grows up in a really dense, biodiverse rainforest. There is a canopy above. It will not be exposed to direct light. Direct light is not going to bring the best out of this plant. It's not going to grow really nice large leaves, but also it's actually just going to damage it. It's going to burn it. So from a light requirement perspective, it's actually a pretty good candidate for our indoors, because light is usually something we're struggling with, and this one is great for a shadier corner of your house. That doesn't mean that it wants no light, right? Like shade does not mean darkness. It wants the elusive, bright, indirect light. No direct sun exposure, but still bright. I have the best time facilitating that with grow lights, because the grow lights are consistent. When we're dealing with natural light obviously changes throughout the year, right? I've had plants burn inside of my house from the harsh Australian sun. But then at the same time, we've also have weeks where it's just raining and I have no natural light and the plants aren't growing at all. So I find grow lights to be the best option to facilitate bright, indirect light very consistently. This one has been supported by my mother plant spectrum for the last, I think, 3.5 years. I've been growing it with the plant spectrum. So this has pretty much only received artificial light and it's growing really well. I do have one that I'm trying to grow in natural light as well, and it's not going as well. It's just not consistent enough, I believe. So can definitely recommend grow lights, and the grow light does not need to be beaming at it. It doesn't need to be right in front of the grow light. It can take a little step back from that, right? I also mentioned earlier, due to the high altitude, it does prefer cooler temperatures. Now, by cool, I mean like between 16 degrees Celsius to like 20, 21 degrees Celsius. I think that would be 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. 60-ish degrees Fahrenheit. However, this plant is currently growing in my office, and in my office it's currently quite warm. We finished summer over here in Australia. My office is not air conditioned, so I've had temperatures going up to 26, 27, 28 degrees in there, and it's currently the last two leaves, these two over here, were the biggest and nicest leaves it has ever grown for me in 5 years. So despite the fact that it's technically like a good 5 degrees too warm for this plant, it still doesn't necessarily mind it. But keep in mind, it's still not exposed to direct light, and the warmer temperatures still come with really high humidity. So in my office, it's usually around 70 to 80% humidity, and I would definitely aim for something above 70% humidity if you want this plant to thrive. I think around 50% humidity you can still make the plant grow. It's not going to thrive to its full potential, but if you have under 50% humidity to offer, I don't think verrucosum is really ever going to yield you the results that you would like. So I've noticed that the warmer temperatures aren't an issue as long as it's in combination with high humidity. Same goes for cooler temperatures though. You still need to keep the humidity high even with cooler temperatures if you want this plant to be happy. So I would be aiming for something around 20 degrees Celsius and 70% humidity for this plant. The 70% humidity is probably the biggest challenge for us indoor growers. I think achieving 20 degrees Celsius indoors should be very much achievable, given that that's the preferred temperature for us humans as well. Now, if you get the conditions right, this plant can actually be a really easy grower and it can grow really fast. I've bought this plant at the same time as I bought my melanochrysum, and this one took half the time to size up compared to my melanochrysum. However, I then had to move house, and this plant happened to be kind of in direct line of my heating, so it got blasted with hot, dry air for a little bit too long, and it started a huge downward spiral that took me over a year to come back out of. Alrighty, that was all about the growing conditions, and let's assume we're setting the full potential for this plant by optimizing the growing conditions. How can we realize that potential? Well, it likes to climb up trees. In my house, it likes to climb up moss piles. Now, technically, it doesn't need to be a moss pile. The pile could be filled with anything you want. The pile could be a piece of wood, right? However, verrucosum has a very disappointing fine root system. Their roots are really fine compared to the size of the leaves and compared to the size of the plant. If I compare that to a monstera, for example, where you can have a single node cutting with a ginormous root system, this will never happen to the verrucosum. These roots are really fine and can dry out really quickly. So I don't think you will have a good time getting this one to attach to anything but a moss pile in an indoor environment. Happy to be corrected in the comment section if anybody else has had better success. But I think moss is my preferred growing medium for this plant, and my preferred way of growing with this plant is vertically. Right? That is really what gets this plant to grow these really nice large leaves. Now, the other reason why I like a moss pile is that this plant grows with ginormous internodal spacing. Not so visible anymore because it is quite mature. Right now the internodal spacing is maybe only this big, but when juvenile, this plant can have internodal spacing of like this size. So that means that on a 180 centimeter moss pile like this one over here, this plant might only grow like 5 or 6 leaves, really, right? Because the internodal spacing is so large, which means that you need to do frequent chop and extending. Chop and extending is where I take the pole, I cut it in half, I replant it, and I re-extend the top. So basically this plant, if it wasn't for chop and extend, would be growing on a moss pile that's by now probably like 5 meters tall. Right? Obviously the bottom 4 meters would be completely bare, but yeah, it would still be a ginormous moss pile, and like I can touch the ceiling with my hand. How am I supposed to fit a 5 meter moss pile in there? So we are relying on the root system within the moss pile so that we can continuously chop the plant, plant it back up, and re-extend it without the plant going through fundamental setbacks. So this is the candidate for a moss pile. If you've ever questioned whether or not a plant needs a moss pile, verrucosum should be the easiest decision. It's a hard yes, for sure. While we're at the large internodal spacing, verrucosum is also the perfect candidate to be triple, quadruple, I don't know what comes after that, planted, right? Multi-planted. Grow multiple plants on one pole so that the internodal spacing isn't so obvious because you've got multiple vines growing on there. Because they have a disappointing root system anyway, you don't have to worry about overcrowding the pole with roots or the pot with roots and so on. So chuck as many in there as possible. They're not all going to eventuate anyway. They're not all gonna race to the top in the same speed. So then with your chop and extends, you naturally kind of select them out. By now I only have 1 plant left on my pole. It started with 3, but the others kind of disappeared with the chop and extends. But instead I've got maturity, and with maturity comes the shorter internodal spacing. So now I don't need this to be double planted anymore. It looks quite lush as it is. I mainly spoke about the moss pile, but let's talk about the pot as well. I have it in my normal chunky airwood mix, but honestly at this stage the pot is mainly decoration. The plant is pretty much just rooted into the moss pile. That is kind of the main thing. The pot is really just to give it stability, but I would go for an airwood mix that has good water retention because it has really fine roots, specifically when it's juvenile, but still well draining, right? It doesn't like it to be boggy. In a rainforest, everything is well draining, but it just rains frequently. It doesn't even grow in the ground in the rainforest. It grows on the tree, right? So it doesn't want to be in soggy soil. It just wants to constantly be provided with water. So I go for higher volume of watering, but a nice well-draining chunky mix. I reckon by far the hardest part about this plant is keeping on top of spider mites. This always has spider mites, honestly. Like it's basically just continuously treat it for spider mites. The best way of treating it was killer mite, which I recently started trying, but it's still very limited experience. So I'm just putting it out there, but not necessarily a recommendation. But my recommendation is definitely to proactively keep cleaning these leaves. I used to take it into the shower every Saturday, every week, gave it a thorough spray with just water, and it was the happiest it has ever been. Ever since it's so large that I can't really move it that easily anymore, or it easily rips when I move it and so on, and I haven't been so diligent with it, I have definitely seen a decline in health with this plant and an increase in spider mites. So I think being proactive is really my main tip over here. And when it comes to providing nutrients, I provide a weak dilution of GT Foliage Focus, which is linked in the description, on a weekly basis, or with every watering, apart from the ones where I take it outside and I hose it all out. But provide a weak dilution. You do not want to over fertilize this plant, otherwise you might end up with yellow edges. Other reasons to have yellow edges is low humidity, too much water, too little water, pests, life. I don't think you can avoid yellow edges on this plant, at least I have not been able to. In 5 years, you also can't avoid these leaves going pretty ugly pretty quickly. So with verrucosum, my goal is really to make it grow really fast so that the leaves are constantly replenished, right? The goal is not to keep the existing leaves look good forever. I think the lifespan of each leaf, from my experience, is around about 6 months. So you're trying to, at all times, have this plant grow. Multi-planting again is a great idea, so that you always have new leaves, fresh leaves, with the nice red backs and so on, rather than trying to hold on for dear life, right? So hence, again, a frequent candidate for chop and extending. When it comes to propagation, I have always propagated it just via nodes. I have had inflows on it, but no desire to do sexual propagation with Philodendron. And I have had 100% propagation success in moss. So again, moss is the way to go with your verrucosum. Let's sum it up. Verrucosum is probably the opposite of a low maintenance plant. It is definitely a high maintenance plant. It requires frequent pest treatments, frequent watering. It requires a very specific set of conditions with high humidity that is kind of just hardish to achieve indoors. So it's definitely a tricky one, but when you manage to grow this plant, it is by far the most rewarding grower I personally have ever had the privilege of growing. Verrucosum, because of its really desirable traits, has also often been used to make hybrids, and I'm just going to put them in via B-roll. But I have a few hybrids in my collection. I have Splendid, which is a hybrid of Verrucosum and Melanochrysum. I have Bellicosum, which is a hybrid of Biliatii and Verrucosum. I have Corsinianum, which is a hybrid of Verrucosum, and I think the other parentages are known. The internet is divided about it. I have Majestic, which is a hybrid of Verrucosum and Sodiroy. Oh, and I have Verrucosum Titanium, which is a hybrid of Verrucosum and Serpens. As you can tell, I'm obsessed with Verrucosum, and any single hybrid that is available in Australia has definitely made it into my collection. And I understand why. I think the redbacks, the hairy petioles, the velvet and the veins, like who wouldn't want to make a baby with this one? I wouldn't recommend picking one up as one of your first plants ever, but if you know your ins and out about moss poles, you've had success with a few other philodendron, you've tried some other velvets and so on, I think maybe it would be time to pick up a verrucosum. But if you don't have experience with that, pick up one of the hybrids, specifically the Splendid, and I reckon you'll have much better success and still have at least half of its features in your collection, right? But be aware that it is a space hoarder with the ginormous petioles. It is definitely taking up quite a lot of space, but I am more than happy to reserve all the space in the world for this beautiful specimen. I hope my passion and love for verrucosum came across in this video. It is definitely still my favorite plant, and it is one of these plants that I just never get sick of looking at. I look at it and I'm just like, it is just as beautiful as it has always been. It is one of these plants that, you know, when I feel a little bit demotivated about my hobby and job, I look at this plant and it makes me happy. So I hope that sort of joy came across in today's video, and I hope it was informative as well. If so, then please give the video a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below, let me know what plant you would like me to focus on next. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!